The intercepted transmission came in fragments, static bleeding through each desperate word. Phantom base. This is Neptune 7. We are, oh God, they're everywhere. Then silence. The kind of silence that settles in command centers like smoke after an explosion, heavy and suffocating. At Bagram Air Base, the intelligence officer's hands trembled as she replayed the recording for the third time. 12 SEALs had vanished into the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan, their last known position a valley the locals called the Throat, a narrow canyon where Soviet helicopters had burned 40 years earlier. The officer stared at the satellite imagery, watching thermal signatures that shouldn't exist, movement patterns that defied everything they knew about Taliban tactics. "Sir," she whispered to Colonel Marcus Reed, her voice barely audible above the humming computers, "there's something else." The thermal readings showed heat signatures moving in perfect formation, too coordinated for insurgents, too large for normal patrol units. Something had evolved in those mountains, something that had just swallowed America's most elite warriors without leaving so much as a distress beacon. Reed's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. 12 SEALs don't just disappear. They adapt, they overcome, they survive impossible odds. Yet the mountains had claimed them as if they were nothing more than tourists who'd wandered off a hiking trail. "What assets do we have available for immediate deployment?" Reed asked, though he already suspected the answer would disappoint him. The valley was too narrow for conventional air support, too treacherous for helicopter insertion, and ground forces would take days to reach the area, days those SEALs might not have. The intelligence officer pulled up another screen, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Most of our close air support is committed to Operation Steel Thunder in Helmand Province. We have one A-10 Thunderbolt available, but—" She hesitated, her eyes finding something in the pilot roster that made her pause. "But what?" Reed's patience was evaporating like morning dew under desert sun. "The pilot assigned to that aircraft is Captain Devora Dust Devil Kovac. She's controversial." Reed's expression shifted from frustration to something resembling recognition. Dust Devil. Even he had heard the stories whispered in mess halls and briefing rooms. The pilot who flew too low, pushed too hard, broke too many rules. The one who'd been quietly reassigned after the incident in Iraq. The one some called reckless while others called her the best close air support pilot they'd ever seen. In the growing darkness of the Afghan night, 12 American warriors remained missing, and their only hope wore the call sign of a desert storm that refused to be tamed. The clock on the command center wall ticked toward midnight, each second carrying the weight of lives hanging in the balance. Captain Devora Kovac sat in the pilot's ready room, her flight suit hanging loose on her compact frame, dog-eared paperback novel forgotten in her lap. The book was Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, and she'd been stuck on the same page for 20 minutes, her mind elsewhere, carried on winds that whispered of home and heartbreak. At 28, Devora had already accumulated more flight hours than pilots twice her age, but those hours had come with a price. Her hands, steady as granite when gripping a control stick, trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching. The tremor had started after Kandahar, after the friendly fire incident that official reports blamed on communication breakdown, but unofficial whispers attributed to a pilot who flew too close to the edge. She closed the book and studied her reflection in the darkened window. Slavic cheekbones inherited from her grandmother, eyes the color of storm clouds, hair pulled back in a regulation bun that never quite concealed the streak of premature silver that had appeared after her third deployment. Her squadron mates called her Dust Devil for the way her A-10 seemed to materialize from nowhere, kicking up sandstorms as she delivered death from above with surgical precision. What they didn't know was that the call sign had deeper roots. Her grandmother, a Czech resistance fighter during World War II, had been known as Prashni Vikris, Dust Storm, for her ability to appear suddenly in Nazi-occupied villages, strike with devastating effectiveness, and vanish before retribution could follow. The old woman had died when Devora was 16, but not before passing down stories of a different kind of warfare, one fought by people who understood that sometimes the only way to survive was to become the storm itself. The ready room door burst open, startling her from memories of Prague winters and partisan hideouts. Sergeant First Class Tommy Martinez, the squadron's operations officer, stood in the doorway with the expression of a man delivering a cancer diagnosis. "Devil, you're up. Colonel wants to see you in the command center, now." Devora rose slowly, her movements economical and precise. She'd learned to read faces during her deployments, and Martinez's expression told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a routine briefing or another milk run to provide overwatch for a convoy. This was the kind of mission that changed everything. "How bad?" she asked, pulling on her flight jacket with practiced efficiency. Martinez hesitated, then met her eyes. 12 SEALs are missing in action. The valley they call the Throat. You know the one. She knew it. Every pilot knew about the Throat, the canyon where helicopters went to die, where the mountains themselves seemed to reach out and swallow aircraft whole. It was the kind of place that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones, and exceptional pilots from those who never made it home. As they walked through the darkened corridors of Bagram Air Base, their footsteps echoed off concrete walls that had witnessed 5 years of America's longest war. Devora's mind was already working through the tactical challenges, the narrow canyon walls that would limit maneuvering room, the unpredictable wind patterns that could turn a precision strike into a catastrophe, the reality that whatever had taken down 12 SEALs was not going to be impressed by a single A-10, no matter how skilled its pilot. But fear was a luxury she'd learned to live without. As they approached the command center, she straightened her shoulders and prepared to face whatever nightmare awaited in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The command center buzzed with controlled chaos, banks of monitors casting blue light across faces lined with exhaustion and worry. Colonel Reed stood at the center of it all, a gray-haired veteran whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. He'd been in Afghanistan since the beginning, had seen good men die for bad reasons and bad men profit from good intentions. Tonight, his weathered face carried the weight of 12 missing warriors and the knowledge that conventional solutions had already failed. When Devora entered, the room's energy shifted subtly. Conversations didn't stop, but voices lowered, eyes glanced her way before quickly returning to their screens. She was used to it, the mixture of curiosity and skepticism that followed her reputation like a shadow. Some saw her as the pilot who'd saved 30 Marines in Fallujah by flying through a sandstorm that had grounded everyone else. Others remembered her as the captain who'd nearly been court-martialed for engaging enemy positions without proper authorization, even though her actions had prevented a massacre. "Captain Kovac," Reed's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Thank you for coming." She stopped at attention, her posture military perfect despite the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. "Sir, Sergeant Martinez said we have SEALs in trouble." Reed gestured to the wall-mounted display where satellite imagery showed the treacherous terrain of the Hindu Kush. The Throat appeared as a dark scar cutting through gray mountains, its narrow confines barely wide enough for a single aircraft. Neptune 7, 12 Navy SEALs conducting a reconnaissance mission, went dark 6 hours ago. Their last transmission. He nodded to the intelligence officer, who played the recording. Devora listened to the fragmentary transmission, her trained ear picking up details others missed. The background sounds, not just gunfire, but something else, mechanical and rhythmic. The panic in the SEAL's voice wasn't just from being outnumbered. It was the terror of encountering something unexpected, something that had shattered their tactical understanding of the battlefield. "Thermal imaging shows unusual activity in the valley," Reed continued, "but we can't get close enough for positive identification. Weather's closing in, which means we have maybe a 4-hour window before conditions become impossible." Devora studied the topographical data, her mind automatically calculating approach angles, weapon delivery parameters, and escape routes. The throat was a pilot's nightmare, a canyon barely wide enough for an A-10's wingspan, with walls that rose nearly vertical for over 1,000 feet. Wind shears would be unpredictable, and any emergency wouldn't leave room for error. "Sir," she said quietly, "what makes you think they're still alive?" It was the question everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to ask. Reed appreciated her directness. "Because SEALs don't die easy, Captain. And because 3 hours ago, we intercepted what might have been a coded transmission from the valley. Too faint to decode, but the frequency matches Neptune 7's backup protocol." Devora nodded, understanding the unspoken implications. 12 SEALs represented millions of dollars in training and decades of combined experience. More importantly, they represented 12 families who deserved better than a memorial service with an empty casket. As she absorbed the mission parameters, the weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar burden. This wasn't about proving herself or living up to her reputation. This was about bringing America's warriors home from a place that had already claimed too many. The briefing room adjacent to the command center felt smaller than usual, its walls lined with maps of Afghanistan marked with red pins indicating fallen heroes and yellow pins showing active operations. Captain Devora Kovach sat across from Colonel Reed, her notebook open, but untouched as she absorbed the tactical situation through pure mental calculation. "The valley runs roughly north-south," Reed explained, pointing to the detailed topographical map spread between them. "Walls are approximately 800 to 1,200 feet high, with the narrowest point measuring just over 200 feet across. That's barely enough room for your wingspan." Devora traced the canyon's path with her finger, noting the subtle curves that would create blind spots and the elevation changes that could hide enemy positions. "What's the suspected opposition strength?" "Unknown. That's the problem." Reed pulled out a classified folder marked with the seal of Joint Special Operations Command. "Intelligence suggests we're not dealing with typical Taliban or Al-Qaeda forces. The thermal signatures are too organized, too sophisticated. Someone's been using the throat as a training ground, and they've had months to prepare." She opened the folder and studied the reconnaissance photographs taken from high-altitude drones. The images showed evidence of recent construction, fighting positions carved into the canyon walls, what appeared to be supply caches hidden among the rocks, and most troubling of all, the wreckage of a Soviet Mi-24 Hind helicopter that had been stripped of useful parts and converted into a fortified position. "They've turned the entire canyon into a kill zone," she observed, her voice devoid of emotion. "That's our assessment. Any aircraft entering the throat would be exposed to crossfire from multiple elevations with no room to maneuver. It's a death trap." Devora continued studying the photographs, her mind working through attack profiles and defensive countermeasures. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, was designed for exactly this kind of mission, close air support in contested environments where precision mattered more than speed. But even the Warthog had its limitations, and the throat was asking her to exceed every one of them. "What about the weather?" Reed consulted his watch. "Fronts moving in from the northwest. We've got maybe 3 hours of marginal flying conditions before it becomes impossible. After that, we're looking at zero visibility and winds gusting to 60 knots. She nodded, understanding that time was now as much an enemy as whatever waited in the canyon. "Sir, I need to ask you something directly." Reed met her gaze, recognizing the seriousness in her tone. "Why me? Half the Air Force thinks I'm a liability, and the other half thinks I'm crazy. You could have requested any pilot from any squadron. Why are you sending Dust Devil into the throat?" The question hung between them like smoke from a distant fire. Reed was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words with the care of a man who understood that honesty sometimes demanded more courage than combat. Because crazy might be exactly what those SEALs need right now. Because every other pilot would look at those images and tell me it's impossible. And because, he paused, glancing at the photographs scattered across the table. Because 3 years ago in Iraq, you flew through a sandstorm to save Marines who everyone else had written off. You brought them home when no one else would even try. Devora felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of expectations that had followed her through multiple deployments and countless missions. Outside the briefing room, she could hear the distant sound of aircraft engines as the night shift began their patrols over eastern Afghanistan, unaware that in a few hours, one of their own would attempt something that defied every rule of tactical aviation. The pre-flight inspection ritual had become as natural as breathing for Devora, her hands moving over the A-10's surfaces with the familiarity of a pianist caressing familiar keys. In the pre-dawn darkness of Bagram's flight line, her Thunderbolt II sat like a sleeping predator, its twin engines and distinctive straight wings giving it the unmistakable silhouette that had terrorized enemy armor for 3 decades. She ran her fingers along the titanium bathtub that surrounded the cockpit, the armored shell that had saved countless pilots from ground fire and shrapnel. The aircraft bore the scars of its previous missions, small dents from small arms fire, scratches from debris kicked up during low-altitude passes, and the faded remnants of nose art depicting a dust devil with the words, "From Prague with Love," painted in flowing script. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, her dedicated crew chief, approached with a clipboard and the expression of someone who'd spent the night ensuring every system was perfect. Santos was built like a linebacker, but possessed the delicate touch needed to maintain the complex systems that kept warthogs flying in hostile environments. "She's ready, Captain," Santos reported, her voice carrying the pride of a master craftsman presenting finished work. "I've personally checked every hydraulic line, every electrical connection, and every round of ammunition. Your GAU-8 is loaded with 470 rounds of 30-depleted uranium, mixed with high-explosive incendiary." Devora nodded, appreciating Santos's attention to detail. The GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon was the A-10's primary weapon, a 7-barrel beast capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute. Each 30 round weighed nearly a pound and could penetrate the armor of any tank ever built. Pylons loaded with 8 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, configured for precision strikes against hardened targets, Santos continued. "I've also mounted 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders for air-to-air defense, though intelligence says you shouldn't encounter enemy aircraft." "In the throat, everything's enemy aircraft if it's shooting at you," Devora replied, beginning her external inspection of the ordnance. Each Maverick missile represented surgical destruction, capable of eliminating specific targets while minimizing collateral damage. The Sidewinders were insurance against surprises, because, in her experience, Afghanistan specialized in delivering the unexpected. As she completed her walk-around inspection, other members of the ground crew finished their tasks with quiet efficiency. In a few hours, their work would be tested in one of the most challenging environments on Earth, where mechanical failure meant more than mission abort, it meant death. Devora climbed the ladder to her cockpit, settling into the ejection seat that had become more familiar than her own bed. The instrument panel came alive as she activated the electrical systems, hundreds of lights and displays painting her face in soft green and amber light. She began the startup sequence, her hands moving through the checklist with practiced precision, while her mind focused on the tactical challenges ahead. The twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan engines wound up to operational speed with their characteristic high-pitched whine, adding their voice to the symphony of night operations at Bagram. Through her headset, she heard the tower clearing her for taxi to the runway, followed by the familiar voice of Colonel Reed in the command center. Dust Devil, this is Phantom Base. You are cleared for immediate departure. Weather window is closing faster than predicted. You have 2 hours and 37 minutes before conditions become prohibitive for return flight. She acknowledged the transmission while running final systems checks. Outside, Sergeant Santos gave her a thumbs up and stepped clear of the aircraft. In the distance, mountains rose like sleeping giants against a sky just beginning to show the first hints of dawn. Phantom Base, Dust Devil is ready for departure. Request direct routing to the throat. As her A-10 began rolling toward the runway, Devora allowed herself one final glance at the photograph taped to her instrument panel, her grandmother in 1943, standing beside a crashed German transport, rifle in hand and defiance in her eyes. 3 generations separated them, but the mission remained the same: bring warriors home. The runway stretched before her like a pathway to judgment, and beyond it lay the Hindu Kush Mountains where 12 seals waited for salvation or death. The choice between those outcomes would be made in the next few hours, in a canyon called the Throat, by a pilot who carried the ghosts of Prague partisans and the hopes of American warriors. The A-10 Thunderbolt II lifted off from Bagram Air Base at 3:47 hours, its twin engines carrying Captain Devora Kovac into the pre-dawn darkness of eastern Afghanistan. Below her, the lights of the base fell away, until only the occasional glow of vehicle headlights marked human presence in the vast wilderness stretching toward Pakistan. The aircraft climbed steadily through thin mountain air, its pilot focused on the tactical situation awaiting her in the throat. At 15,000 feet, she leveled off and established contact with AWACS Control, the airborne command and control aircraft that would coordinate her mission from a safe distance. The voice that came through her headset belonged to Major Jennifer Walsh, an air battle manager whose reputation for precision matched her own. Dust Devil, this is Sky Watch. We have you on scope, heading 270 toward target area. Be advised, we're detecting intermittent radar contacts in the valley, but signatures are inconsistent with known aircraft profiles. Devora processed this information while checking her navigation systems. Sky Watch, can you characterize the contacts? Negative, Dust Devil. Whatever's down there isn't broadcasting IFF and doesn't match our aircraft database. Could be UAVs, could be equipment we haven't seen before. Recommend extreme caution on approach. The warning confirmed what intelligence had suspected. They weren't facing a conventional enemy. As her aircraft flew deeper into the mountains, Devora began her final mission preparation, reviewing attack profiles and emergency procedures, while the autopilot maintained course toward coordinates that had swallowed 12 American warriors. She opened a secure channel to Phantom Base, and Colonel Reed's voice filled her headset. Dust Devil, final intelligence update. We've detected increased radio traffic in the target area, but it's encrypted with methods we don't recognize. Whatever force is operating in the throat has sophisticated communications equipment. Understood, Phantom Base. Any update on Neptune 7's status? Negative. No contact since initial distress call. You're flying blind, Captain. Devora acknowledged the transmission and settled deeper into her flight planning. Flying blind was nothing new. Half her missions in Iraq had involved responding to troops in contact with minimal intelligence about enemy positions or strength. The difference was that those missions had been over relatively flat terrain with room to maneuver. The throat offered none of those advantages. 20 minutes from the target area, she began her descent, dropping to 5,000 feet above the valley floor. The mountains rose around her like ancient sentinels, their peaks touched with snow that gleamed in the early morning light. Through her canopy, she could see the throat cutting through the landscape like a wound that had never healed, its narrow confines disappearing into shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. Sky Watch, Dust Devil is beginning tactical reconnaissance of target area. Request, you monitor for electronic warfare activity. Roger, Dust Devil, will keep watch from up here. Be advised, weather front is moving faster than forecast. You may have less time than originally planned. She acknowledged the warning while beginning a careful approach to the valley entrance. The throat opened before her like the mouth of some primordial beast, its walls rising steeply on both sides to create a corridor barely wide enough for safe flight. As she dropped lower, studying the terrain through her targeting pod, she began to understand why the throat had earned its reputation as an aircraft graveyard. The canyon walls were scarred with impact marks from previous aircraft, their twisted metal remains serving as monuments to tactical aviation's limitations. Soviet helicopters, Northern Alliance transports, and at least one American drone had found their final resting places among the rocks and shadows. Each wreck told a story of overconfidence meeting reality in the unforgiving mathematics of mountain warfare. But among the wreckage and shadows, thermal imaging revealed something else: heat signatures that moved with military precision, defensive positions that had been carefully prepared, and most troubling of all, equipment that generated electromagnetic signatures unlike anything in American intelligence databases. As Devora flew deeper into the throat, she began to realize that 12 SEALs hadn't simply been overwhelmed by superior numbers. They had encountered something that challenged every assumption about enemy capabilities in this remote corner of Afghanistan. The first indication that the throat had become something beyond a traditional battlefield came through Devora's electronic warfare systems. As her A-10 flew deeper into the canyon, multiple warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel, indicating radar lock-ons from directions that should have been impossible. The narrow canyon walls were reflecting and amplifying radar signals, creating a funhouse mirror effect that made targeting solutions nearly impossible. Skywatch, Dust Devil is receiving multiple radar contacts from unknown sources. Signatures don't match standard SAM systems. Major Walsh's voice carried new tension. Roger, Dust Devil, we're seeing the same thing from up here. Whatever's painting you is using frequency-hopping techniques we haven't encountered before. Devora reduced power and descended to 300 feet above the canyon floor, low enough that the walls on either side rose above her aircraft like man-made cliffs. At this altitude, she was below most radar coverage, but exposed to small arms fire from every concealed position. It was a calculated risk that depended on speed and surprise rather than altitude for survival. Through her targeting pod, she began identifying the defensive positions that turned the throat into a carefully orchestrated kill zone. Machine gun nests had been carved into the canyon walls at multiple elevations, their fields of fire overlapping to create crossfire opportunities that would shred any aircraft caught in the funnel. Anti-aircraft positions used the natural camouflage of rock and shadow to remain invisible until weapons were fired. But it was the electronic signatures that troubled her most. Her radar warning receiver painted a picture of coordinated air defense systems that belonged in the arsenals of nation-states, not mountain-based insurgents. Someone had invested serious resources in turning this remote valley into a fortress. Phantom Base, Dust Devil is observing sophisticated defensive preparations. This isn't typical Taliban activity. Someone's been planning this for months. Colonel Reed's response came through static-filled transmission as atmospheric conditions continued to deteriorate. Roger, Dust Devil. Intelligence concurs. Your primary mission remains locating and extracting Neptune 7. Rules of engagement are weapons-free against any hostile forces. As she flew deeper into the canyon, Devora spotted the first evidence of the SEAL's fate. Scattered equipment marked a defensive position that had been hastily abandoned, including communications gear and ammunition that suggested a running firefight. The thermal signatures she'd observed from altitude resolved into abandoned fighting positions where American forces had made their last stand. Her heart rate increased as she realized the implications. 12 SEALs didn't abandon equipment unless they were either dead or had been forced to move quickly under extreme duress. The scattered nature of the gear suggested they'd been overwhelmed and forced to withdraw deeper into the canyon, where the walls narrowed and escape became impossible. Dust Devil to any Neptune 7 personnel, this is close air support on station. If you can hear this transmission, respond on any frequency. Static answered her call, but hidden within the white noise, she thought she detected something else, a pattern that might have been Morse code, so faint it could have been imagination born from desperate hope. She banked the A-10 around a curve in the canyon and suddenly understood why 12 seals had disappeared without a trace. The throat opened into a circular valley approximately 500 meters across, surrounded by walls that rose nearly straight up for over 1,000 feet. It was a natural amphitheater that had been converted into the ultimate fighting position, with defensive positions carved into the walls at multiple levels. And at the center of the circular valley, arranged in tactical formation around what appeared to be the entrance to an underground complex, were vehicles and equipment that made her blood run cold. She was looking at a forward operating base that rivaled anything American forces had constructed in Afghanistan, complete with sophisticated air defense systems, armored vehicles, and personnel, whose movements suggested military training that exceeded anything the Taliban had demonstrated. This wasn't an insurgent hideout. This was a military installation operated by professionals who had turned the throat into a trap specifically designed to capture or kill American Special Operations Forces. As realization settled over her like a cold shroud, Devora understood that her mission had fundamentally changed. She wasn't conducting a simple search and rescue operation. She was looking at evidence of a sophisticated enemy presence that threatened every American operation in eastern Afghanistan. The circular valley revealed its secrets reluctantly, like a poker player forced to show a winning hand. Through her targeting pod, Devora identified at least 30 personnel moving with military precision among defensive positions that had been engineered rather than simply constructed. These weren't cave-dwelling insurgents armed with surplus Soviet weapons. They were professional soldiers equipped with modern gear and supported by infrastructure that suggested months of preparation. She climbed to gain a better observation angle while staying within the protective confines of the canyon walls. What she saw made her stomach tight with professional concern. The underground complex appeared to extend deep into the mountainside, with multiple entrances protected by overlapping fields of fire. Vehicle tracks in the dust suggested regular supply runs, and communications equipment visible on various structures indicated sophisticated command and control capabilities. Phantom Base, Dust Devil has located what appears to be a significant enemy installation. This is not a typical Taliban operation. Recommend immediate intelligence evaluation of my targeting pod data. Colonel Reed's voice crackled through increasing atmospheric interference. Roger, Dust Devil, we're receiving your feed. Intelligence is evaluating now. What's your assessment of Neptune 7's status? Devora continued her reconnaissance while considering the tactical situation. 12 SEALs had entered this valley and encountered a prepared enemy force with superior numbers, defensive positions, and home field advantage. Even America's most elite warriors had limitations when facing overwhelming odds in terrain that favored the defender. Her targeting pod identified what appeared to be a prisoner-holding facility near the main complex entrance, a structure with small windows and heavy doors that hadn't been visible in satellite imagery. If any members of Neptune 7 had survived the initial contact, they would likely be held in a facility designed to prevent escape and resist rescue attempts. Phantom Base, I'm identifying possible detention facilities in the target area. Thermal imaging shows human heat signatures consistent with prisoners under guard. The response came through heavy static as the approaching weather front began affecting communications. Dust Devil, weather, closing, need, immediate. She switched to backup frequencies, but couldn't re-establish clear communication with her command center. The storm front was moving faster than forecast, and she was running out of time to complete her mission before conditions became impossible for return flight. Banking the A-10 around the Circular Valley's perimeter, she began mapping defensive positions and identifying high-value targets that could disrupt enemy operations. The GAU-8 cannon would be effective against personnel and light vehicles, while her Maverick missiles could eliminate hardened positions and underground entrances. But engaging targets in the confined space of the Circular Valley would expose her aircraft to concentrated anti-aircraft fire, with limited room for defensive maneuvering. It was then that she heard it, a faint transmission on the emergency frequency that made her heart skip a beat. Any station, this is Neptune 7 actual. We are alive but in immediate danger, need extraction. Repeat, Neptune 7 is alive. The transmission was weak and distorted, but unmistakably American. Somewhere in that underground complex, at least some members of Neptune 7 had survived their capture and maintained access to communications equipment. Devora felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with critical decision points. She could attempt to extract intelligence and return to base with information about the enemy installation, or she could risk everything on a rescue attempt that violated every principle of tactical aviation. The safe choice would preserve her aircraft and crew for future missions. The dangerous choice might save American lives that were running out of time. As she considered her options, the voice of her grandmother seemed to whisper through the cockpit noise. Sometimes the only way to survive is to become the storm itself. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity that felt like stepping out of shadow into sunlight. The radio transmission from Neptune 7 actual changed everything. Captain Devora Kovacs banked her A-10 into a wider orbit of the Circular Valley, her mind racing through attack profiles that had never been attempted in terrain this challenging. Below her, the enemy installation buzzed with activity as personnel moved between defensive positions, apparently responding to her aircraft's presence with trained efficiency. She established contact on the emergency frequency, keeping her transmission brief to avoid triangulation. Neptune 7 actual, this is Dust Devil providing close air support. What's your status? The response came through static and interference, the voice strained but professional. Dust Devil, this is Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, Neptune 7 actual. We have 4 KIA, 8 personnel captured and being held in underground facility. Enemy force estimated at company strength with sophisticated air defense systems. We need immediate extraction. Morrison. She recognized the name from briefings. A SEAL team leader with multiple deployments and a reputation for getting his people home regardless of circumstances. If Morrison said his remaining team members were alive, she believed him. Neptune 7, actual. Can you provide targeting information on guard positions and facility entrances? Affirmative, Dust Devil. Main entrance is marked by 2 BTR-80 armored personnel carriers positioned at coordinates I'm transmitting now. Secondary entrance is northeast of main complex, covered by ZU-23 anti-aircraft guns. We're being held in sublevel 2, but I don't know how deep this facility goes. Devora processed the tactical information while watching enemy personnel continue their preparations. BTR-80s were Soviet-era armored vehicles that had been upgraded with modern weapons systems. ZU-23 anti-aircraft guns could shred an A-10 if she flew within range, and their positioning suggested overlapping fields of fire that would create deadly crossfire zones. She keyed her radio again. Neptune 7 actual, I need to know about those air defense systems. What are you seeing? Multiple SA-18, MA and PADS, at least 6 ZU-23 positions, and something else, shoulder-fired systems I don't recognize. These guys are equipped for serious air defense operations. SA-18s were infrared-guided missiles that could track the heat signature of her engines, while the ZU-23s would fill the air with 23 shells that could penetrate even the A-10's armored cockpit. Combined with unknown weapons systems, the air defense network represented a lethal threat that would challenge even her aggressive flying style. But 8 American warriors were depending on her, and the weather window was rapidly closing. Through her canopy, she could see storm clouds building over the mountain peaks, promising conditions that would make flight impossible within the hour. Neptune 7 Actual. I'm going to create a diversion to draw defensive fire away from the main complex. When I begin my attack run, can you signal the location of prisoner holding area? Roger, Dust Devil. We'll mark our position with infrared strobe when you begin your run. Devora selected her first target, a cluster of anti-aircraft positions on the eastern rim of the circular valley that commanded the widest field of fire. Eliminating those positions would create a gap in the air defense network and force enemy personnel to reposition, potentially creating opportunities for the captured SEALs to attempt escape or signal their exact location. She armed 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles and began her approach from the south, using the canyon walls to mask her approach until the last possible moment. The targeting pod locked onto the ZU-23 position just as multiple radar warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel. Neptune 7 Actual. Dust Devil is beginning attack run. Mark your position when I engage targets. She pushed the throttles forward and dove toward the valley floor, the A-10's engine screaming as she accelerated through air that seemed to thicken with approaching violence. Anti-aircraft fire began reaching toward her aircraft like deadly fingers, 23 shells leaving bright tracers that painted geometric patterns across her vision. The first Maverick missile fired with its characteristic smoke trail, streaking toward the anti-aircraft position with deadly accuracy. Before impact, she had already selected her second target and fired the second missile, their combined explosions sending shockwaves echoing off the canyon walls. As secondary explosions indicated successful hits on ammunition storage areas, she saw it, an infrared strobe flashing from a small structure near the main complex entrance, exactly where Morrison had indicated the prisoners were being held. Now she knew where her people were. The question was whether she could get them out alive. The aftermath of the first Maverick strikes created temporary chaos in the enemy defensive network, but Captain Devora Kovac knew the advantage would be measured in seconds rather than minutes. As she pulled the A-10 out of its dive, enemy fire intensified from multiple directions, creating a web of tracers that turned the circular valley into a light show of deadly intent. Neptune 7 Actual. I have visual on your position. Can you move to external rally point for extraction? Lieutenant Commander Morrison's response came through bursts of small arms fire audible in the background. Negative, Dust Devil. We're locked down tight. Underground complex has multiple security levels. Need you to create access point for extraction. Devora banked hard left as a SA-18 missile streaked past her starboard wing, its infrared seeker momentarily confused by the chaff she deployed. The enemy was adapting quickly to her presence, with air defense systems tracking her movement and adjusting their firing solutions. She had maybe 2 more attack runs before the concentrated fire became impossible to survive. Through her targeting pod, she identified the main entrance to the underground complex, a reinforced portal guarded by the 2 BTR-80 armored vehicles Morrison had mentioned. Eliminating those vehicles would expose the entrance, but it would also require flying directly through the concentrated fire of every air defense system in the valley. She selected armor-piercing rounds for the GAU-8 cannon and,